Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rahul Bansod, and I'm a research intern at Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. It is a matter of great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all to another edition of ICS Wednesday seminar titled China and the Global Nuclear Order: The Long March to Strategic Deterrence. This year, we mark 60 years since China conducted its first nuclear test and adopted its no first use policy. While Mao Zedong once downplayed nuclear weapons as a paper tiger, they quickly become a key part of China's security strategy. As China's global influence grows, its nuclear policies face greater scrutiny, particularly in the light of challenges to non-proliferation treaty and its resistance to treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons. Today's seminar will discuss China's evolving role in global nuclear politics, focusing on its participation in non-proliferation and disarmament efforts through international discussions and detailed analysis. The speaker for today's seminar is Dr. Renu Rana, a faculty member in International Studies at Flame University's Department of Social Science. She holds a PhD in International Politics from Fudan University, China. Dr. Rana has been recognized with prestigious awards including India-China Senior Scholar Fellowship and the Outstanding International Students Award from China's Ministry of Education. She also worked as a graduate fellow at the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Education and Research Center of Korea, Korea's Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, South Korea. With nearly a decade of experience in China, Dr. Rana has held positions at institutes like Shenzhen University, Fudan University's BRICS Center, Technologia Monterrey, and Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. Her research focuses on international politics, Chinese diplomacy, India-China relations, disarmament, and nuclear non-proliferation. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. M.S. Pratibha, an associate fellow at the East Asia Center, MPIDSA, and a member of editorial board for strategic analysis, RETILH. She holds a doctorate from Jawaharlal Nehru University, where her research focused on China's nuclear policy and strategic conduct from 1992 to 2008. Dr. Pratibha has a diverse academic background with a master's in international studies, a bachelor's in mathematics, and training in political theory and Mandarin at Beijing Normal University under the Chinese government scholarship. Her research interests include China's nuclear strategy, elite politics, military modernization, and East Asian security issues. Before I hand it over to the chair, I would like to ask all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and affiliations. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand options during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself. Thank you. Now I hand it over to the chair. Over to you, Dr. Pratibha. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing us, Mr. Rahul. We have here Dr. Renu Rana to speak about China and the global nuclear order, a long road to strategic deterrence. This is a very timely topic given the changes which are happening in the global nuclear order. And I have a pleasure to listen to this talk today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and insights on this topic. I can see that you have a long, expertise in this subject. We know that in the past decade, there's been a lot of shift in the global nuclear order, especially after the end of the Cold War. And the uncertainties for China has only increased as it has to grapple with the changing nature of this global nuclear order. And in this case, you see that some of the threats which has been part of the Cold War nuclear order slowly becoming unviable to the United States. And in turn, it has affected the strategic deterrence that China had gained so far with the US. The old norms were being shed and new norms were being built, or it is, you can see that it is emerging in this nuclear order. Some of them could be the normalization of defensive technologies to missile defense, or the uncertainties remain over the post-INF scenario, especially near China's neighborhood. Under such scenarios, there's also been a demand for China to pursue its disarmament in a more serious fashion. and its missile capability has been seen as threatening to the security of the region. So, under this context, it's important or imperative to know how China is going to achieve its strategic deterrence when we know that the nuclear deterrence is not, it's an anchor, but not a sole guarantee of its overall comprehensive deterrence. To what extent these new norms in the nuclear order are going to test its resolve to continue its strategic deterrence, and in what way China would seek to achieve its objectives of its strategic deterrence. To continue this very important topic, I invite Dr. Renu Rana to speak, and I'm looking forward to hearing her thoughts. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pratibha, for providing the context for the audience also. I also understand the kind of situation we are facing in the Middle East, Central Asia, and how the leading crisis of military escalations and the spilling over impact. We have seen that these incidents have raised prudence regarding nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And this is the right time for us to discuss how the nuclear weapon states, particularly China as it is neighboring India, how does it perceive these challenges, and especially when it comes to the norm politics of the non-proliferation regime, particularly NPT. So I would start this talk. So I believe that the cases of Gaza or the war in Ukraine and the intentions to subvert these crises to benefit national nuclear programs are also on the rise. And it is not just in China, we have witnessed it in North Korea, we have witnessed in Iran as well. And the cases of North Korea and Iran are, in particular, have been cited by many scholars and have been there in literature for a very long time, particularly because they are not really the nuclear weapon state recognized by NPT. But at the same time, we have been seeing a lot of literature coming up and criticizing the nuclear weapon state in particular too, because they are the ones who are deeply bound to implement disarmament and non-proliferation. So when we look at China in particular, I believe China remains a balancer in these debates across the globe. And its role has been in question recently, both doctrinally, when I'm talking about doctrine-wise, it's more morally and ethically, where does it place its commitment to the disarmament. At the same time, militarily, as we have seen, there have been rise in its nuclear arsenal, as well as the modernization of its nuclear weapons. Also the military supplies. So as China's global influence expands, the way it approaches nuclear weapons is increasingly scrutinized, not by the countries outside the NPT regime, but as well as the other NWS states within NPT. So this is significant as the international community debates nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. This brings up debates about where non-proliferation, or in particular NPT regimes, stand. So against this background, I would like to discuss China's role in the global nuclear order as nuclear weapons continue to be detrimental to its strategic deterrence. So moving forward, I would like to first discuss China's nuclear journey, as in how China's nuclear strategy has evolved vis-a-vis its growing global influence. Then I will be talking about China's role in the non-proliferation disarmament framework, such as NPT, TPNW, and CTBT. Lastly, I will focus on China's nuclear enigma and its implications for the global security in particular. So as the host has already talked about how this year is special, especially looking at China's nuclear policy. So the year 2024 marks the 60th anniversary of China's first nuclear test and adoption of its no first use policy. Looking at details, China exploded its first atomic bomb in Xinjiang province back in October 1964. And it was a defining and pivotal moment in China's pursuit of nuclear capabilities. So far, China has carried out 45 tests between 1964 and 1996. However, it is interesting to note that, as many of you must be familiar with this, that Mao Zedong in 1946 satirized the atomic bomb as a paper tiger. However, he gradually changed his position as he understood the deterrent value of the bomb, or nuclear weapons for that matter. Though China, in its official statement of the first nuclear test, also stated, quote unquote, the atomic bomb is a paper tiger, was our view in the past, and this is still our view at present. That this quotation is from 1964 after they had their first nuclear test. China also stated that China is developing nuclear weapons not because it believes in its omnipotence, nor because it plans to use them. So China will. So when it said that, China is also highlighting its NFU, that is no first use policy, which was also introduced in 1964. But when we look how the China's position on nuclear weapons or nuclear deterrent changed over time, we have seen that Mao Zedong was a central figure in China's development of nuclear weapons and the stipulation of their status and role in the country's security strategy. So 1964 was also the year when China joined the rank of nations with atomic bomb capabilities. And there were a couple of motivations, or I'll say factors, which made China go in this direction. Frequent US nuclear threats against China, or there was Soviet pressure. Also, there have been pressure from other Chinese leaders who kept pushing the Chinese leadership to pay more attention to nuclear weapons programs, as they played a very important role in Chinese security strategy. So we have seen, if I have to summarize this, I would say that China's nuclear strategy evolved from early skepticism to its current role as a strategic nuclear power. Also, when I'm moving forward, I will be also mentioning that when I say Chinese doctrine and Chinese posture and Chinese nuclear strategy, so Chinese doctrine more or less has remained the same in principle, in statements, and in documents. And if I have to quote the latest Chinese document for this, so that is the Chinese National Defense in New Era. It's a white paper on defense, which was released in 2019. So there also, China has been, at least in principle and words, has been committing to the no first use policy, where China says that China is always committed to nuclear policy of no first use of nuclear weapons at any time or under any circumstances. And it will not be using the nuclear weapons against any non-nuclear weapon states or nuclear weapon-free zones unconditionally. At the same time, China also emphasized how nuclear weapons remain a core deterrent for its self-defense. It is not going to first strike with any country with a nuclear weapon. So it has stayed consistent when it comes to doctrines, whether it is the no first use policy or CND, that is. It is like basically however, the Chinese nuclear strategy has undergone a lot of changes. And I would like to talk about how it is now focusing more on the second strike capability. The capability here I want to focus on. So earlier it was talking about the minimum deterrence, but now it is more focusing on the mutual assured destruction, where it is talking about. So one of the, like I have seen and I have read a lot of articles from the Chinese side, where they try to defend why China is not being very transparent in the, like, when it comes to its pursuit of nuclear weapons, nuclear technology, or number of nuclear arsenals. So one of the reasons they say it has a very special reason, like no first use policy of China. China's nuclear doctrine has a very significant influence on that, because China will not be striking any country with the nuclear weapons first. So it is important for China to have a part of its nuclear capability which it cannot be transparent about, because then it actually, in that case, it will be weakening China's second strike capability. Also, it is now like Chinese scholars have been emphasizing how China, they have been emphasizing that modernization of nuclear forces or nuclear weapons has to do with its pursuit of survivability of nuclear weapons. So these are the major, like this context I wanted to highlight before I move further into how China's nuclear journey has undergone changes. So when we talk about the China's nuclear policy and undergoing changes, I would like to highlight a few things, few factors. One is we have seen an increased number of warheads. There have been a lot of publications, a lot of policy papers coming from the US in particular that have been talking about how China's, the number of warheads in China will increase to 1,000 by the end of this decade, that is 2030. They have been talking a lot about the diversification of the delivery systems, whereby they are focusing on the land-based missiles, the sea-based platforms, as well as the bombers. Also, there have been debates going on about the development of new nuclear systems in China. whereby they're talking about the more powerful ICBMs. They're talking about the SLBMs, that are submarine launched ballistic missiles. They're talking about hypersonic glide vehicles. So these are basically the new nuclear system that have been introduced in China. Also, there have been improvements when it comes to China's nuclear command, control, and communications, because they believe that it is very important for them to maintain the coordination of this nuclear triad, or the land, sea, and air-based platforms. At the same time, if you look at the discourses across the world, particularly in the US as well as in EU, or for that matter in Japan, there have been studies about the subcritical nuclear testing happening in China, whereby China is not testing nuclear weapons the way it did before 1996. So they are actually still been focusing they have been focusing on simulation or the computer modeling, whereby they can test and refine its nuclear warhead. So these developments have been studied and highlighted over time in media, in policy papers across the world outside China. So here I would like to highlight one paper, especially coming from Japan, which is still not a nuclear weapon state, and it has always been advocating for nuclear non-proliferation disarmament. So this paper was actually from Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and they have been trying to substantiate this argument coming from the Department of Defense of the US, that what are the reasons, what are the factors that are making countries believe that China is actually not only modernizing its nuclear weapons, but they are also increasing the number of warheads within the country. So they have tried to access some satellite images, and they have been looking also, they have been studying China's involvement with the IAEA. So, which is very, very significant here, I believe. So, there was one article, I'm sure most of the scholars here who work on China's nuclear policy, or work on NPT, non-proliferation in particular, they have studied about this article, INF CIRC 549. So, this is the kind of a document which countries voluntarily submit to IAEA. It actually reveals about their plutonium storage and how much they are utilizing in the civil and as well as the military purposes. So when we look at China's behavior, this is, I'm quoting United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. It's an autonomous research body within United Nations. So they have, within their reports, they have spoken about how China has not submitted its report from 2017 to 2022. And this report is from March this year. So they believe that this kind of document, though might not ensure or might not really reveal the true intentions of a country involved in the plutonium in the nuclear technology, either for civil or the military purposes, but it does provide data about the amount of separated plutonium in various forms, as well as about plutonium in irradiated fuel. Though these submissions are voluntary, but they provide an important insight into the status of various plutonium management programs. And why I will try to contextualize this particular um, uh, behavior of China, like why China is not submitting, or China is not really volunteering about, like, not being transparent about its facilities. So one of the reasons they say that is suspended publication of this declaration in 2017 came shortly after it started operations of its first civilian reprocessing facility. So this is also one of the reasons why, which made a lot of countries skeptical about China's intentions towards disarmament or non-proliferation. So when we talk about, I will move further about China's role in non-proliferation and disarmament. So China has been part of many, many platforms, many organizations, institutes, and framework. For instance, China became member of International Atomic Energy Agency, which I just discussed about, IAEA, in 1984. It ratified NPT in 1992. It signed Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996. However, it has not ratified. So when I'm talking about the not ratified, I will further, I'll be coming to those, the factors, eventually. Also, we have seen that China has been a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, China's global initiative to combat nuclear terrorism. So when we talk about the China's engagement or China's position in the nuclear global order, I'll say Mao's era basically began with the China's rejection of the global nuclear regimes. Like I will try to eventually compare China's position in the nuclear order or nuclear institutes, or we call it nuclear regimes, to economic and political regimes. But here, when I'm focusing here, the earlier China was also a little bit skeptical. It believed that it is actually creating the monopoly of the nuclear weapon state. However, eventually, when we see like post-Mao era, China began to engage more with the global nuclear order, a combination of domestic and international considerations. So we have seen in 1990s in particular, there was deeper engagement with the institutions like NPT. So China also reinforced elements of nuclear order related to non-proliferation. At the same time, it was more focused around that time to enhance its own global image as well as legitimacy. So it has to go and speak for it. It came up with like we have seen a lot of times in a lot of white papers, statements coming from the president, they focus on humanity, humanitarian cause. So it also came up with that. So it started being more vocal about non-proliferation, disarmament initiatives. So moving forward, now China maintains its position in favor of nuclear non-proliferation in principle, but refrains from major disarmament commitments, which I will be coming to eventually. So China has been actively engaging in nuclear governance, as I already mentioned, in the kind of initiatives and frameworks it's a member of. But it has been cautious when it comes to engaging in nuclear disarmament. It has been highlighting, it has been mostly focusing on criticizing the commitments of the other countries, like United States or Russia, for that matter, whenever somebody tries to question China's own commitments to disarmament. So focusing on NPT in particular, as I did my PhD research also on NPT, and I've studied the Chinese, the NPT review conferences and what relevance do these review conferences have in today's world. So the three pillars of NPT, I will say the nuclear, I'm arguing that global nuclear order is actually the NPT stays the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation regime in today's world. It focusing on the three pillars of nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. So when it comes to the review conferences, I would like to highlight that so far we have had 10 review conferences. So the last one was to be held in 2020, but because of COVID, it was delayed and then it was postponed to 2022. However, unfortunately, we could not see a final consensus document either in 2015 review conference or in the 2022 review conference, which is sad. So there have been disagreements coming from the Russia in the latest one. However, in the past also, all the nations, all the nuclear weapon states have been more criticizing each other instead of focusing on their commitments to disarmament. And also, when I mentioned a couple of times earlier in my statements that China throughout, whether it is at the defense white papers or it has been statements at the global forums, China has always talked about how it is committed to the no first use policy. So it keeps on focusing on those doctrines from time to time. But when it comes to disarmament, at the same time, I have seen there has been a trend where it doesn't shy away from highlighting why if there comes a situation where it is a threat to its core interest, national security, it might have to reconsider its commitments. So I would like to quote the statement by a delegation led by Shun Xiaobo. So he was speaking at the NPT Review Conference Preparatory Committee, whereby he said though he spoke about his commitment to non-proliferation disarmament, at the same time, China stated that China is open to having dialogues and consultations on arms control and non-proliferation with all countries. However, this is something I would like to highlight. China will not accept the practice of claiming to be willing to have dialogue while constantly taking negative actions that undermine China's core interests. So this is something China has been focused. At the same time, China also spoke about the hypocrisies when it comes to Russia and US. So China currently is the third largest, it's a country with the third largest stockpiles of nuclear arsenals after US and Russia. So it spoke more about how US and China should take the initiative and try to work on reduction of their nuclear warheads. So they were focusing on the New START treaty. And we have seen how in the past also, recently last year as well, that Russia has been talking about withdrawing from the New START treaty, while US was asking or trying to convince Russia to actually come up with a new framework as this New START treaty will be expiring in 2026. So I have seen this trend here, like most of the statements, whenever it comes to China's talking at the review conferences, that they're more focusing or criticizing the other NWO states, but there has not been an initiative taken from the Chinese side to talk about disarmament. Also, when we look at the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, this is TPNW, which came into 2017. There is another. I'm not sure if I should the word hypocrisy, but here they have been coming up with a different argument, and it is from all the NWO states. So when we talk about TPNW, most of the states, including China, are not okay with it. They have not signed or ratified the treaty, and they have always consistently voted against the annual UN General Assembly resolution that welcomes the TPNW. So their argument has actually been that TPNW is actually contradicting the very basic principles of NPT. However, many scholars and many countries have come forward and countered this argument. They said, no, it is actually complementing the NPT because TPNW is more focused on disarmament. However, because the NWS countries have actually have always consistently been focused on their strategic landscape, why it is not possible or viable for them to have disarmament immediately. So they focus more on NPT, which is talking about the eventual disarmament, which might take years. But there have been scholars questioning this because it's already been years. We have had 10 review conferences, 5 years like interval, and still we haven't seen anything from either of the NWS states. And particularly here, China becomes a very significant country because China has been projecting itself as a balancer. Whether it was in Ukraine, we have seen in Israel, China is the one who has been talking about dialogue. China from time to time has been talking about disarmament. So China, for a very long time, when it comes now, I will be trying to bring in China's focus or China's involvement in the economic regimes for that matter, or the regimes of global cooperation. So many times China has been focusing on multilateralism. China has spoken about how the countries, more countries should be there to decide for the, like any decision should not be taken just by a few number of countries. But when it comes to NPT, when it comes to other frameworks of nuclear non-proliferation disarmament, China has been more focused on forwarding the status quo. It is not talking about changing it, whether it is P5, as we've seen, like India has been observing how China has a stand that it's not okay involving a lot of other countries in or expanding the P5 for that matter. So that is one thing. China is not actually upholding its principles when it comes to global cooperation. It has, otherwise, if we see at BRICS Forum, we see it at SCO, China has always been insisting on the principles of multilateralism. But that is something we have not seen here when it comes to non-proliferation disarmament. So when we look at the CTBT, also in particular, which was introduced in 1996, China signed, but it has not ratified the CTBT. So again, one of the reasons was that US has withdrawn. So China also did not ratify this. So only right now, currently, only Russia, France, and United Kingdom are the NWS countries that have ratified the CTBT. US, India, Pakistan, North Korea, in addition, China have still not ratified the treaty, and it's coming a lot from the strategic deterrence principles. So coming to the last portion of my presentation, I'll be talking about the Chinese nuclear enigma and the implications for the global security. So when we talk about the nuclear enigma, I'm talking how China is trying to balance between deterrence, international norms, and security concerns. So it becomes very important when we look at the implications for the global security. So China's emergence as a nuclear superpower, or China's not committing to non-proliferation or implementing the um, disarmament commitments, we have seen that it poses a challenge to the strategic nuclear forces that are the supreme guarantee of the security of all, across the world in Asia, or we can even see it in NATO. Also, we have seen that looking at the number of the Chinese warheads, looking at the modernization of this nuclear capabilities, that it is actually, as Dr. Pratibha also initiated, like the introduction when she was talking about how these are actually undermining the security landscape within the Asia Pacific or South Asia for that matter. So there are fears that it can actually lead to more arm race. It can promote arm race, and it can actually make more countries go for uh, proliferation of nuclear weapons. So, but like coming to the conclusion part, I would like to highlight one thing here. I'm not saying that China alone or the non-commitment of the NWS members alone is the reason why NPT is not uh, being implemented when it comes to basic commitments to non-proliferation disarmament. Of course, there are a lot of other factors. There are systematic factors. We have seen that there are gaps in the legal framework of the treaty itself. We have seen the how review conferences are uh, not coming up with something fruitful or not helping NPT to hold its relevance in today's world. So when we talk about the relative factors, it goes more beyond the systematic. So there is actually the global contest for power, which we have seen not only from China, we have seen across the world, coming from various NWS, various NNWS, as well as the nuclear armed states or the outlier countries as India and Pakistan. So this has actually led to more see there is more arm race happening. There is a lot of countries actually now trying to circumvent the treaty or the legal frame of the treaty, and they're still having like they're not committing as they should have. So I would like to here conclude my presentation by saying that this analysis I was trying to I want to draw attention to a question that these evolving technological and military dimensions in general across the world, but as well as in China specifically, as my presentation talked about, it will remain a critical focus of analysis for the researchers in the coming times. And as we have seen that when we try to access the data, when it comes to China's nuclear number of nuclear warheads or nuclear capabilities, we have seen that there is not enough transparency. So there will be data coming from the DoD from the US. There will be satellite images coming in. But I think unless China, in genuine sense, commits to disarmament, it is hard to reach a conclusion where the Chinese, where China really stands when it comes to its role in the global nuclear order. So in principle, yes, it stands by it. In principle, it has always been focusing on non-proliferation and disarmament, but in practice, we have seen some developments which I believe contrast its commitment. So this is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Renu, for such a stimulating and insightful analysis. And you have brought out the contours of the the non-proliferation and disarmament in the wider world, and how China is seen as a balancer in the by countries, or it wishes to be seen as a balancer in the international global order, and how there are some discrepancies in what they profess and what is their actual policy. And I just would like to draw from your own analysis, and just to add on to what you have said. You're right when Mao Zedong said that nuclear weapons is a paper tiger, because if you see the 1960s news cycles during those times, if you go and read People's Daily or Chinese interventions in the UN, they were very critical of non-proliferation regimes or general norms of nuclear norms, because they saw it as a superpower rivalry or part of the imperialism practiced by both US and Soviet Union. From being a fierce, fiercely criticizing nuclear norms and nuclear order, they became one of the fiercest defenders of the nuclear order, in the sense that saving NPT is very important to them in the current scenario. So it is such a drastic, I would say, change for the Chinese perspectives on non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament. I think the thing that we need to maybe distinguish, I think I'm sure you brought it in your own presentation also. One is that earlier probably it was seen as more as a political weapon, and slowly as capabilities increased, more nuclear warfighting strategies came into their nuclear policy. Now, there are two views you can say. One is that capabilities determine your deterrence policy, or you might have a strategic culture which kind of advises restraint, restraint in the use of nuclear weapons. At least in my view, both are right in the Chinese case. But I think for me, it closely follows their own understanding of deterrence, or let's say even broader deterrence policy, because in my understanding, whether it is the number of nuclear warheads, I think there is an understanding that they don't want nuclear deterrence based on parity, like the way US and Soviet Union had determined in the Cold War that their mutual deterrence would be based on parity in the number of nuclear warheads. They had rejected that premise that they want mutual deterrence with the United States on the basis of parity, that they would not go down that route as the Soviet Union. So there is a pragmatic aspect to how they approached mutual deterrence with the United States. As far as the no first use policy is concerned, in my understanding, it's mostly to do with crisis stability between US and China. Yes, you can, I think to some extent, you can argue that there is a restraint, China practices restraint in the use of force. But I think it is also beneficial to them that since US follows a preemptive strike, no first use policy provides a crisis stability in the situation, because as long as no first use policy said, there's crisis stability between the US and China. So this is very paramount. So to my understanding, it makes little sense for them to abandon the no first use policy, as long as the mutual deterrence relationship between the US and China is very unstable. Now, why is it that China is defending, non-proliferation and not maybe, pursuing disarmament, as you yourself has brought out in your presentation? Is that in my analysis, I think one is that as they entered, as you said, slowly started entering the nuclear order and becoming more and more part of the nuclear norms. I think in some ways, one of the ways which I'm sure you have already said, it legitimized their nuclear weapons capability, and it also leads to some restraint in other countries, as you said, Middle East. In some ways, they do think that maybe proliferation, or they come to understand that proliferation of nuclear weapons might not be as stable as they believed before. But I think that one of the reasons why they are very reluctant in terms of nuclear disarmament is the principles which they adopted in the Cold War. That is, US and Soviet Union developed their nuclear warheads as part of their, competition, superpower competition. Whereas the Chinese were increasingly seen as part of the third world during those times and seen as a champion of the third world. And they said that we are not, this is purely for defensive, purely for defense, for strategic defense. So when there is for China, if US and Soviet Union does not pursue disarmament, then it doesn't make sense for the Chinese to pursue disarmament, because precisely because they don't believe in nuclear deterrence based, mutual deterrence based on
Parity.
parity. It doesn't make sense for them. So it is not practical for them to pursue this disarmament, because their deterrence strategy is based on a broader security framework to counter the sheer nuclear superiority of the US. So if you see their post-Cold War discourse after missile defense, US withdrew from missile defense, you would see that their approach is to make nuclear weapons part of their strategic deterrence, but not the only aspect of their strategic deterrence. This is why they increase the missile capability. So one is to, of course, the US scholars will say that it is purposefully putting US and China in nuclear entanglement. But for me, I think what the Chinese are in some ways try to do is to make US hesitate to use preemption at any circumstances. So no longer just the NFU was enough. You need to broaden the threat perceptions of any preemptive attack on preemptive strike on China. So the only way they could do it without getting into the whole nuclear arms race is to increase their missile capability. That itself can be threatening in terms of the mood in the neighborhood would be is that countries would be less willing to get US intervention to intervene, because they would be deterred by China's missile power. So that would be enough deterrent. So when you are then combining the fact that you don't know whether the missile is conventional or nuclear, or you're uncertain about the number of nuclear warheads that you have, or where those nuclear warheads are dispersed, there are enough uncertainties that created among the minds of the adversary before intervening. And so anytime any soon they would not wish to abandon these kind of uncertainties, because this is their sole deterrence against a very large nuclear superior power. So it doesn't make sense for China to go the disarmament route, especially in the post, as US is pursuing missile defense, and especially in the post INF scenario. It doesn't make sense for China to do it. Now, the thing is, I think the more uncertainties in China has come about because the US is also responding to this missile power of China, that the countries in the neighborhood are getting deterred by China's, rocket forces capability, whether it is conventional or nuclear. So while the US is responding through deploying, IRBMs around its neighborhood. So for China, the whole premise which leads to some kind of stability, or their pursuit of achieving mutual deterrence with United States, where we see that the United States does not believe in no first use policy, nor it believes that China would follow the no first use policy under very excruciating circumstances. For example, let's say if your nuclear infrastructure is under threat, do you still not follow the no first use policy? So the United States does not believe in China's no first use policy. So there is no mutual deterrence between US and China. So under these circumstances, under such scenarios, I would say that Chinese approach would be more towards nuclear non-proliferation, not towards disarmament, because their nuclear strategic deterrence is already under pressure by the changes in the global nuclear order. So you are right that there are discrepancies in what they profess and what they do, but that there are a lot of changes which are happening, and how that's one of the reasons you're right, that they want to see as a balancer. They don't want to be in a situation where they're forced to that direction where they believe that they don't have the numbers that both US and now Russia has to enter into a nuclear disarmament. And you see the inclusion of Japan, because Japan has joined the US in trying to pursue multilateral disarmament, multilateral nuclear disarmament, in the sense that any further disarmament would not happen without the inclusion of China. And China is very much against this inclusion of China, because it goes against their own understanding of what is China's nuclear policy means in the nuclear order, that they are not pursuing nuclear arms race to be part of the nuclear disarmament. So I think there are the way the way you have brought up, there are a lot of broad challenges to Chinese approach to disarmament, or Chinese approaches to non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation. I think the from your presentation, what can be drawn is that because the new norms are still emerging, and we don't know the direction in which the post-INF nuclear order is going to emerge, or how whatever China has achieved some level of deterrence through its missile capability, when it is being challenged, you see some changes in China's nuclear weapons policy. That again, I will not go to the point that they will abandon NFU, because it leads to some crisis stability in the relationship. But definitely their deterrents have become more visible. There are more tests which are being done. They have become more transparent, in the sense that they made their second artillery forces into rocket forces. That is kind of a visibility that they've brought. They're not hiding it anymore. So they have a chance, they have a choice between going and modernizing and competing with the United States, or to adjust their nuclear deterrence or strategic deterrence in such a way that it can still provide some level of deterrence against the changes in the global nuclear order. So in my view, probably they're going for more visibility of their deterrence, because if the deterrence becomes more visible and you can signal it better, then then it leads to maybe changes in the neighborhood, which might seek US intervention in any potential conflict. So I think that you have brought many points into the into the discussion, and you've brought the complexities of Chinese choices into the discussion. So it's been a very stimulating, I would say, like discussion, and I'm looking forward to reading your paper when you publish it. So it's been really good. So I just saw some questions also for you. How do you factor US-China relations in China's reluctance to commit to NPT order and China's approach to India's nuclear program?
Okay. I believe Dr. Pratibha already answered part of it when she was talking about US involvement in the Asia Pacific, and we have seen how US is engaging with Japan. It has been engaging with South Korea in particular, and both having the historical issues with China. China has always been concerned about US involvement in the region, and we have seen especially in the last decade, we have seen how China, when there was THAAD issue, was very popular. I was in China that time, and how because of US involvement in South Korea, China actually banned a lot of shops, a lot of products from South Korea. So China, US, has always been a key factor when it comes to China's strategic deterrence. So, and that is also being a key factor when it comes to China's commitment or reluctance to commit to NPT order or go for disarmament policy, or implement it. So I think Dr. Pratibha has already spoken very much in detail, so it won't make sense for me to just keep repeating. But yes, I would like to say it's more to do with the geographical landscape also, looking at the US involvement in the region. So that is a very major, the most important factor, the US-China relations, the role of US-China relations when it comes to China's reluctance. Yeah.
I would like to ask you, brought
mm,
about the general direction of the
mm, mm,
non-proliferation
mm,
in Middle East and in
mm,
other countries. So, in what aspect do you see China's, view towards such, outlier states or those kind of states? How are they
mm.
How are their views evolving towards those issues?
So China has always asked other countries not to proliferate. So as China has been highlighting from time to time that they proliferated or they went for nuclear weapons because such was the situation. If they had, if the strategic situation was in their favor, they would have never chosen that path. But because China was continuously threatened by the US during the Cold War era, or there was a China sign of Soviet split as well. So there was a lot of pressure coming on China, which made China to go for nuclear weapons and to have sort of a say in the in the global nuclear order, because it felt threatened from both both the camps of the Cold War. At the same time, there were a lot of changes happening around. We have seen how communist states were dealing with it, the entire arm race that time. So China had to do it, but basically for the self-defense, as it's very like evident for us also to see. But when it comes now, China has always argued that the situations are much more different, and we have seen, and as you mentioned, one of the points that sometimes the kind of capabilities of the way weapons are being modernized is very difficult for the other states to only most of the facilities we have seen like dual use purpose. They might be missiles. We do not know if it is a conventional missile or it could be with a warhead. So there is always a kind of concern like, what if a state attacks and it is the nuclear capability? That it might lead to this instability in the region altogether. So as you I was reading this term, like it is very much there, like how US was relying on this nuclear brinkmanship, right? That is a very debate about it, that sometimes you try to have this like nuclear capability to deter the other country, was if there is lack of transparency, especially looking at the advancement of the technology, it can actually backfire. China for a very long time thought that there will be no we will not be needing nuclear weapons as such. Yes, even now China has this stability instability paradox going on, that if you have the nuclear weapons, their countries are still very sure that they will not be needing nuclear weapons, even though they are engaged in conventional war. As we have seen China's engagement with India at the border, also they were, but still none of the countries actually cited, or refer to the nuclear weapons at all. So that has been there, but also as you mentioned, that the kind of modernization, the advancement we have seen or we have witnessed when it comes to nuclear capabilities, there is also a risk that though countries will never try to use nuclear weapons, but definitely there might be a risk involved just because of it, if it leads to misunderstanding. So that is a very major risk, and China also recognizes it. If I have to go with principle, so at the same time, China would not like to see more neighboring countries with nuclear weapons. China has seen it with North Korea, so China has seen it with Russia. So China doesn't want other countries. Have we seen debates recently? How there are some groups, there are some civil society organizations that are talking. They're talking about Japan choosing, the nuclear capabilities, or South Korea for that matter. But will China be happy with it? Definitely not. So at the same time, when it comes to Pakistan and India for that matter, so I think China, that is the reason, as you said, China is more focused, more committed to non-proliferation than the disarmament. So yeah.
Professor Rapai?
Thank you, Pratibha, and thank you, Renu. It was interesting to listen to you. You covered a lot of ground, but only I thought 2 points. One is NFU. If you go back to their document in 1964, that is not applicable to nuclear weapon states. So US you can rule out in that category. The other thing, and more important, I think, the developments in delivery weapons, that has become quite interesting. For example, the Oreshnik missile Russia launched on Dnipro in Ukraine, that is giving thought to the what is going to happen in the delivery systems. So if the delivery systems, for example, till now US were thinking, or many other countries were thinking, their missile resistance capabilities were intact. But that is going to be upset. So the more and more we will see the developments in delivery vehicles and rather than proliferation. Then another factor is Japan. Already Pratibha covered it a little bit. But Japan was always a problem because Japan, in two aspects. One is Japan is under the nuclear protection of US, under the treaty. That is one. Secondly, if you look at the capabilities of Japan, Japan can, I won't say the time because I am not a nuclear scientist, but they have all the wherewithal to make a nuclear weapon. So that time is when and where they prefer to join that club. So I think that uncertainty China is going to keep in mind. Russia, you already brought out in 1968, 69, China was one country threatened by the Soviet Union. Of course, that time their relations were different. But the other fundamental thing which kept China is the economic issue. Because China never want to overspend. They learned the defense expenditure of Soviet Union very clear, why it went broke. And so I'm not getting into the details, but that balance they are still keeping in view of their how much they can spend and where they want to spend. I think those things and the technology gains also. So I think would like to get your comments. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Dr. Renu.
Yeah, so I also highlighted that it is actually when we look at the number of nuclear arsenals, so these reports are basically from the US side coming, and the Japanese also, a lot of papers we are seeing nowadays that they're talking about how the nuclear arsenal or the weapons, the warheads are going to increase, like going to be more than twice the numbers right now. So we are not really sure like how, and Dr. Pratibha also mentioned that China is actually not really focused on the increasing the numbers of nuclear warheads because it doesn't look at the parity. Rather, it's more looking at the advancing the delivery, vehicles for that matter, or advancing the technology or modernizing the capabilities. So that has been the focus of China's strategic deterrence. So I would also say that yes, China has been focusing, and China has itself talked about it in a lot of statements we have seen coming from their leadership that they have been talking about modernizing the nuclear capabilities. In a few years, like few years ago, China also highlighted that, but they denied increasing the number of warheads. But they said no, they are working on modernizing their strategic deterrence or nuclear deterrence for that matter. So that is already been verified from their side. But looking at the numbers and all, as China itself is not being transparent, as we discussed. They are not even submitting the reports on the plutonium, so let alone the weapons. So
But
that
nobody
is
is
difficult for us to say. Yeah. Yeah, no, but at least other countries have been submitting the documents. At least some little bit of glimpse we are still getting into it. But when it comes to China, it is completely denying it since 2017. So I'm talking like more in like being there. Like they are not even talking about how much plutonium they are using or how much, like what are the facilities and how much is being utilized right now. So that is like completely like I won't even say lack of transparency. There is no transparency at all since 2017 for that matter. Yes, other countries, no country for that matter, are being open about it. I would not be talking about the outlier states right now because they are not bound by IAEA when it comes to submitting these reports, but at least the NWO states. And if I look all the 5 states, I think China is the one that has openly refused to submit that report. So,
but
yeah.
US was never transparent on its nuclear material.
Nuclear material, yes, but I think there is still, when it comes to lack of transparency,
Maybe
it is
submitting the reports.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying. Still the degree of transparency. There is still a little bit of difference there. But when I was looking at, when I was talking to my friends in China also, so there, the way it works for them, they believe that because the number, they do not share the parity, the number of nuclear weapons is still far, far less, like coming to China, sorry, US and Russia having thousands and India, and China is having only like 350 if you go by the, with the numbers cited by SIPTE and other organizations. So China needs to maintain that lack of transparency just to make sure that they have the second strike capability with them in hand. So I understand where it is coming from. Like if I try to look at the rationality behind the decision.
Makes economic sense. That is.
Yeah, economic sense as well, I would suggest. Yeah, I mean, that does have a role to play. And at the same time, if you look at the last year, it was this year. So they were talking about this, a lot of initiatives China is coming up, like global security initiative, global development initiative. So when it comes to China's image as they have already been talking about themselves being a leader of global South, at the same time being a balancer or being there for the cause of humanity or the humanitarian grounds. So they have been focusing more on cooperation, more on development, economic cooperation. So yes, economy, and they have other deliverables to focus on when it comes to economic expenditure and all. But I can't really speak about numbers when it comes to this because I have not really dug that much into detail about the expenditure side.
Okay, moving on. Pratyusha, do you have something to?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Renu, for a very interesting conversation. And thank you, Chair, for allowing me to raise a question. I do realize it's very late and we have to wind up, but just quickly, um, what do you think that the Chinese experts identify as major strategic mistakes or, correct decisions that they need to make, especially in the context of, how they take away from other states' behavioral patterns during any of the historical nuclear crisis or escalation. So what do they think about things like, extended deterrence assurance towards key allies, partners, or, the idea of any kind of nuclear escalation, either dramatic or incremental. So what are their views on these particular things in a historical context, if at all you want to, flag off something which is a major takeaway given what we see today as China's nuclear policies? Thank you.
Please go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah. So if you talk about, I am thinking that you're referring mostly to the Chinese leadership or the Chinese scholars, because there is a diversity of views on that point, basically. So when I interact,
if we had to look at it from Chinese scholars' point of view, even the point of view which is quite mainstream, which is kind of calling the shots in terms of deciding the policy behavioral patterns. So, yeah.
So when it comes to during my PhD also, I had this field work in different parts, including in China. So one of the understanding I got was China has been focusing on this collective security instead. And they still go with the commitment of non-proliferation and disarmament as the same principle. But one of the solutions they provide is this collective security. Like I'm talking from my interactions with the experts on the field. Looking at the mistakes as such, I guess I would like Dr. Pratibha to just give some points here because maybe I'm having an issue understanding the question correctly. So yeah.
Strategic mistakes, I don't think the Chinese really talk about strategic mistakes openly. Generally, when they do, it's a collective judgment they make. So far they have not said anything about the strategic mistakes they've made in nuclear non-proliferation or disarmament. So far they have been convinced that the path that they have gone is so far right. Like strategic mistake, when they admit it, it is something like it's a policy judgment. So it's like about Mao's role in the economic policy, or Mao was right or wrong. It's not something that they just talk about it just like that, because it's based on consensus among the party elders and the leaders and various interest groups. As far as I know, they have not talked about anything about strategic mistakes in terms of nuclear global order. I have not found any kind of public documents on those lines. That's all I can say as of now. And actually, I'm actually, from your presentation, I'm very fascinated by this aspect. You said that Chinese have been like getting more and more involved in non-proliferation, right?
Yeah.
So far, they must have, by now they must have a lot of gained a lot of experience in this, multilateral institutions on non-proliferation. Do you what is the level of what do you think that China has achieved so far? And do you think that there is a broad acceptance to China's role as a balancer in this? That is something I would like to know. Like, how does other countries view China's role when it comes to its, to non-proliferation? Like, I'm not saying like maybe US, but maybe so many countries in the global South. How do they look at it?
If with your permission, Chair, if I can just interject, like just two lines.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So, when talked about strategic mistakes, it's not really just pertaining to historical context of China, but the scholarship on nuclear doctrine within China has been quite vocal about what they view as strategic mistakes in a historical context in the global order, as you pointed out, including the issue of nuclear blackmail. That remains a very powerful narrative in modern Chinese thinking. Preventing the nuclear blackmail of not just other states, but what China may face in future. So this is where your question about non-proliferation becomes even more interesting, because what is it that is propelling China to align very closely with non-proliferation? I wanted to kind of just underline where my question was coming from. So thank you.
I think nuclear blackmail was an issue in the 1950s when they
Yeah.
didn't have any nuclear weapons capability. But as of now, it is not exactly nuclear blackmail, it's a nuclear threat, which they are, deterring against the threat of US nuclear use. So even the way they have looked at the threat perceptions, those have changed. When you're talking about strategic mistakes, I think you're talking about maybe the criticism against the current policy. Maybe you're talking about
No, no,
among
no.
the.
That is why I wanted to clarify that strategic mistakes that have been committed in the historical past in last 60, 70 years, and what do they take away from
No,
there, which is relevant to their current
I
context?
don't
I
think
just wanted to say
they
that.
they they see it as a strategic mistake. The nuclear blackmail is which set out, as the speaker pointed out, that's what started their whole nuclear program, and they've been, in the sense, they've understood that they've made the right path in responding to that nuclear blackmail. Starting from the Korean War, they went through 5 nuclear crises. If you look at the historic context, both with US and Soviet Union. So in some ways, they have a deep understanding that they've been on the right path, that they have responded prudently to the nuclear blackmail. They have not jeopardized their economic development. They had prioritized missile development over aerospace, like fighter jets, during those times when they had limited resources. They, in fact, have developed a very good strategic forces, force command to some extent to deter US, preemption. To a large extent, there is a consensus and support for China's nuclear policy. But yes, there are debates, because the more and more there are challenges arising in the global nuclear order. There are debates as to whether it is enough, or there are a lot of criticisms. There were all, but
Adding, hmm.
please go ahead.
Yeah, adding to the same argument, actually, China for a very long time, and even now, they have been criticizing US and Russia for not having something called no first use policy because it has actually caused other countries to go nuclear. So it is actually adding to the cause of the nuclear proliferation. So China itself has been very proud of having this doctrine. And even we look at the review conferences and also different meetings or statements coming in, China has been pushing the other NW states to have no first use policy. We do not know, even as Dr. Pratibha also said in the beginning, that US still doesn't trust China when it comes to following on their doctrine. But same time, this is something but there have been in past, a few years ago, there were some voices coming in within China that they should actually give up on LFU doctrine now. But those voices have been very, very limited. So there is still a sort of a consensus among the Chinese academia that they still want the LFU doctrine to be there. And because it is helping them to stand out, it is helping them to stand their moral ground as well as a leader of the global south, that they should, the other countries should also follow, because it will be actually adding to the same cause of non-proliferation. Like, other countries will also be much more secure if they know that other countries are not going to start the nuclear war or not going to attack. So that is actually, I think they definitely, the leadership does not feel that there have been any drawbacks in the way they, because they have always been justifying. Even when I started my presentation by talking about the statements coming after their first nuclear test in 1964. That time also, they did not deny, they did not try to reject Mao Zedong's statement about paper tiger. They still said, no, we still want to go by that. We are abiding, we still believe in that. Though we know that right now it doesn't actually stand true. But in terms of principle as such, they still believe that nuclear weapons should not be used to fight, or should not be used at all for that matter. They should just be there as a deterrent capability. That's it. So there have been a sort of, yes.
Can I come in, Pratibha, for a second?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Pratibha. Actually, I think the debate, if you look at the peak days of the Cultural Revolution also, the Chinese nuclear establishment was protected by different factions of the party. They never allowed to cut down their grants or to get into their way. It was very interesting that Chou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, how they tried to protect the nuclear scientists and the nuclear establishment. So I think there is an elite consensus in the party and the state to project their capabilities. And what changed, maybe, I think, what Renu was referring. Recently, or during the debate going on 90s or early 2000s, they allowed some of the voices come out. But on the core issues, I think there was always a consensus. And their main concern is to protect their interests. It is not to, because the another change after 96, the CTBT, they become part of the rule makers. No more the rule. They don't have to follow the rule. They are, by their virtue, being the P5 nation, and in the nuclear field also they have the say. So they are not facing the situation as India or any other country, Iran, some other countries are facing in the nuclear issue. So I think we have to factor those things into this debate. Thank you.
Okay, do you have anything to add, Dr. Renu? Okay, so there are 2 to 3 more questions and comments. Just to there seem to be they're asking whether, I mean, that there is no difference between declaratory policies such as NFU and actual policy. So do you have anything to say that are there any distinctions between NFU as a declaratory policy and actual policies, like whether does it really matter to have a declaratory policy?
I think China has been consistent, at least we have seen so far in its practice also, how it has never actually used nuclear as a, as a threat to any country for that matter, even after whatever issues they have been sharing with US and China. So I think they are abiding by this so far. And I also do not foresee any change in its nuclear no first use policy. As I said, it is giving it the moral legitimacy to its role as a balancer as such. So
Okay, there's another
I
question.
do not think, yeah, please.
What role the demographic number of China plays in China's nuclear posture? Do you think demographics affects China's nuclear posture?
Very interesting question, actually. Yeah. Who asked this question? Can they just elaborate a little bit, like which
There's a
particular aspect they're looking at?
simple question.
Yeah.
What role the demographic number of China plays in China's nuclear posture? Are you talking about, I'm not sure whether they're talking about the, I don't know, the number of
They have the
NCOs.
demographic change, like challenges right now within China, but I'm not sure like how
It
the
affects
person
the,
wants me to connect. Yeah, that is something I'm not sure how they want me to connect to it.
well, I can just say
Maybe
that
they can elaborate. Yeah.
they're going for more NCOs, so probably
Hmm.
they're looking at quality rather than quantity in their, nuclear forces. And another question, to what extent are readings based on literature in Chinese, PLA journals, universities, academics, institutions, how much of these discourse can be seen as projection aimed at the outside world, and how much genuine debate between Chinese scholars? At least secondary sources in English are better endowed Western establishment who scout and base themselves on Chinese language sources. Basically, they're asking whether you can trust the Chinese language sources that you read.
I won't use the word trust here, but yes, if you want to have, like, if you want to study at least, like, there are a couple of interesting studies when they're talking about the mindsets, not just of the leadership as well as the people. And I hear this is something I would like to connect with this demography, but more about the mindset, the
Okay, I think you
sociological.
elaborated demography
Yeah.
in terms of size of possible loss in case of nuclear damage. I think the number of like,
Okay. Yeah. So how I was connecting to it first, like before I read this second part of the question, but yeah. So when we look at the sources and how much role, like how much insight can we really get into China's posture, I think it depends on your question. How are you like what do you really want to know? So for instance, I would like to highlight one study which was done, and they did surveys, they did read the Chinese reports, and there were like a lot of Chinese sources. Even if you look at the, for instance, just one example I'll give. When you have anything posted on WeChat or QQ, there are always comments coming in just below it. So there are a lot of Chinese people talking about and expressing their views on this. So for very like the study talks about how, despite whatever changes in the in the strategic landscape outside China, the people have still been favoring the no first use policy because they are still they still believe in this the moral significance, of having that kind of policy. So I think that way it depends. If you are trying to have a question something to do with this, so it will help you a lot. But when it comes to um, as you said, you want to know how many nuclear weapons like China is accessing and how they're modernizing. It is more or less it's there, like in the leadership also we have seen this. I haven't seen myself much contrast there, like reading the Chinese resources and the statements which have been translated into English as well. Like there have been statements from the leadership, even as the UN General Assembly, the UN Security Council. So I don't see much difference there. It's more or less just the language is a little bit here and there different, but I don't see much difference. And even when you're saying like lot of Western media, the way they're talking about China's nuclear deterrence or the changes in nuclear deterrence and how much they're relying on it. But if you look at the studies from anywhere, like you look at Japanese, like a lot of think tanks I was looking at, and what are the bases, what are evidences they are relying on? Most of them rely still on the satellite images. They all here and there referring to each other, like counter citing each other. Again, coming from the behavioral differences, how they are, the kind of statements they're making, it's mostly coming from that. So I do not think it makes much difference. Yes, but it depends on your analysis also. So some time ago, I worked on the changes of Chinese military, or what kind of, Chinese personal recruitment for that matter in the PLA. So if you try to analyze deeper, you might see, and Dr. Pratibha also spoke about this, the rocket force coming in. So it depends on how you analyze. So it definitely gives you an insight of if you want to go into detail and try to understand the repercussions for the overall nuclear capability of China. So it depends again on how you're approaching the said question.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree with the speaker. Just to say that they're also speaking to their own domestic audiences. They can't lie everywhere. Like the disinformation or misinformation cannot happen in every journal, every article, and the Chinese sources they write. If you look at like the defense, the larger defense write-ups are very varied, and they write a lot. So they're not just writing to international audiences, but they're also writing to their own domestic audience, and they can't lie everywhere. Every magazine, every journal articles, there are hundreds of different science and technology journal articles. They can't lie everywhere. So, and I think the speaker would also agree with me that over a period of time, you know how to look at which articles to dismiss and which article to take it seriously. Over a period of time, you develop that understanding that, okay, I don't need to take this seriously, but this one seems very important and I need to take it seriously. You kind of develop that understanding over a period of time as you read more and more Chinese language sources. So the speaker is absolutely right. To some extent, you can figure out to a large extent, and you can always collaborate with see whether it coincides with what others are saying to some extent. And you also discuss with a lot of your, I'm sure the speaker being in China has discussed with many scholars and tried to to see whether her theories are can it be proven, or how far is it true. I mean, she has, I think, mentioned in her own presentations that she has spoken to a lot of people. So many ways you can to some extent come to an understanding. It might not be 100%, but to a large extent you can come to an understanding about what is going on in general, as far as we can make sense in our human mind. So so I think the speaker in that way is absolutely right. There's another question. Does China's self-acclaim of high moral pedestal allow them to secure access to nuclear and rare earth materials trade with suppliers from Africa and Central Asian countries? I think they're talking about resource diplomacy.
Okay, that is very different from like what we were talking about, though.
Okay, I've
Yeah,
been
it is.
told that
Yeah,
we are running out of time.
yeah.
So I just want to thank Dr. Renu. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I really enjoyed it. And your, insights have been very helpful. And I'm sure it's been helpful to whoever has been listening to this discussion. And I hope you publish your, whatever you have told us right now. I hope to read it on paper. And I all the best to your endeavors in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for giving your feedback and comments, and all the wonderful audience members to, for their questions and also comments from time to time. I think it is also making me now, reflect on a lot of questions I was dealing with myself when I was doing this research. Because whenever, like, when it comes to nuclear, no matter which countries, and especially when it comes to China, definitely you yourself are having like fighting some internal battles, right? Like you believe something, you have seen something, but what you're writing and to what extent you can rely on the evidence you have with you is, I think, it's a challenge. And Dr. Pratibha would also agree with me, like especially working in this field. So at least I'm happy that there are a lot of students and a lot of members in the audience, that they are actually very keen, and they have a lot of questions here. And I think we are moving in the right direction that like way, because it's actually a very stimulating exercise, I think, for a lot of people also here. And I'm sure a lot of students are here. I saw that they are from SIS, JNU and all. So I hope you also start having more research questions and start working on those questions. And yeah, we have more uh, publications coming from India, because we don't have much actually. It's very limited still when it comes to the Indian academics and researchers. So it's actually, it's like it's a brighter side I'm seeing here. So yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah.
Over to you, Mr. Rahul.
Thank you, Chair. I seek your permission to formally bring an end to today's session. With this, we come to the end of today's seminar. We thank Dr. Renu Rana, Dr. M.S. Pratibha for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. The video of today's discussion shall be available on ICS YouTube channel. We invite you to the upcoming Wednesday seminar scheduled for 4th December. Further information regarding the event can be found on ICS website. You may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. And thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.